today to talk about the Great Compliance Gap, which is Australia's regulations versus the world. In all honesty, I'm relatively fresh to the Australian market. I have had consulting clients here previously, but I've just actually moved into Brisbane and I'm getting more heavily involved with the space here. My name is Atiyyah Ferouz. I go by Atiyyah for short. I have 7 years of experience in the cannabis and hemp industries globally. I'm the founder and CEO of AgCann Consultancy, which is an international consulting firm with projects all over the world. We have projects in Canada, of course, the US, Europe, South America in particular, Argentina, Uruguay, and Colombia. Africa as well, in South Africa, and I just signed a client in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course Australia and Asia. So Asia in particular, I'm very heavily focused in Thailand, moved to Bangkok in 2023 to kind of ride the wild west of cannabis wave, and then went nomadic for about 18 months before settling into Queensland, which is so conservative I can't have a sugar glider for a pet. So that's been a stark contrast for me personally. We do a lot of different things. I actually do a lot of end-to-end consulting, I would call it. Operations, of course, the commercialization of processes. I ran a 1 million square foot cannabis greenhouse in Canada, producing about 2,500 kilos of cannabis per week. This is a lot of cannabis, and it's a completely different scale than you'll see in most of the globe. So getting that level of experience is not something that's easy to come by. We do a lot of quality assurance in that field in particular. Cannabis has just grown rapidly as we talk heavily in my focus in my presentation about international trade. I'm a certified pharmaceutical GMP professional. I'm a trained pharmaceutical quality system auditor, and I'm an international registered certified auditor as well. I am the only person in the cannabis industry with that specific resume, and it means that I heavily do projects for quality assurance and compliance all over the world. Tissue culture as well. My background is actually a master's in genetic engineering and plant biotechnology. For those of you who don't know what tissue culture is, it's the growing of plants in a fully laboratory in vitro environment. And this is very heavily relied upon in the cannabis industry for the preservation of genetics and to ensure product consistency and quality. Last but not least, I'm the founder and executive director of the International Cannabis Quality Standards Association, or the ICQSA, and that is why I'm a co-host for this event. So the cannabis industry is becoming rapidly globalized. We moved over 200 tons of cannabis in 2024. Everybody is increasing their limits aggressively. Australia just hit their import limit. Germany hit their import limit. Actually, almost simultaneously, 1 week after the other, I was in a panic mode watching all of these governments say they're no longer issuing import permits for cannabis I had waiting at the docks to enter. And we're seeing a lot more product pathways. We're seeing movement from countries we haven't seen before. We're seeing Thailand is becoming a very large emerging exporter this calendar year for the first time. And we're seeing adjustments of new countries coming online strictly to kind of go into these export-related pathways. There has been a lot of change in legislation, and we're seeing it for the most part in the right direction, which is we're seeing more countries come online to offer access to medical cannabis. Recreational is of course something, there's a lot of intricacy around that. Canada is one of the only recreational countries in the world, and there's reasons for that related to the UN, at least they say. But medical, at least, is booming. We're starting to see people understanding the wellness benefits of this plant and the products that we produce from it. We're seeing a lot of people pushing more into extraction because that is a more controlled product than flower. So when we're looking at talking to emerging markets and emerging governments, who I speak to a lot on policy advisement and how they should do things, pushing for medical extraction and export only are always items that I find are more palatable and easy to get across. Because if it's going to be an extract, it's more controlled. They don't have to allow domestic cultivation if they don't want to. They can bring the product in from somewhere else. And then if it's export only, for example, they're not kind of risking what they feel is the safety of their own domestic population. I don't agree with that, but I do agree that there is a lot of hesitation depending on the history and historical context in that country around moving cannabis into the domestic population. Thailand, we'll talk about in a little bit, kind of pulling back in those respects. With the globalization of cannabis, that means there is increased visibility of compliance gaps. It becomes very obvious now when regulations don't line up or there are issues moving product from point A to point B. Australia has a very high degree of potential to be a leader in the cannabis space for several reasons. Your healthcare system's actually fairly good. As somebody who comes from Canada and was able to get a specialist appointment here in less than 6.5 months, I was quite delighted about it. You have a good set of pharmacovigilance. The requirements at least are there. The enforcement's another thing, especially in cannabis, and how the TGA oversees things I have a lot of problems with, but it is there on paper and it looks very good on the global stage. Agricultural capabilities. You're a proven exporter. Australian wines all over the world. Australian meat, quite have in Thailand at least. Every steak I ate was an Australian Wagyu steak. And then of course you have fruits as well. I just actually had somebody reach out to me to start developing greenhouses in South America to actually try to take some of Australia's business for the production of fruits into Qatar. So there's a lot of stuff that you guys are known for on the agriculture side, as well as having very strong biosecurity controls, which makes it a kind of ideal environment to grow cannabis in. Hop latent viroid is a disease that is plaguing the entire cannabis industry, and Australia has had very little incidence of it because of your strict biosecurity laws. So you actually may be one of the last continents for cannabis cultivation that doesn't have this huge crop decimating virus spreading rapidly through every facility. Last but not least, reputation. Australia, generally speaking, is considered a trustworthy country. You make a lot of high quality products in different areas, of course, but the kind of branding of your country to quality being somewhat related to it is really important. And that means that, you know, we can have things come out of Australia as a premium product. The challenges my clients face in Colombia, in South Africa, the second a country hears that they make the product, there's an immediate suspicion on quality. But if it comes out of Australia, people will automatically assume it's better quality, even though a lot of it is not. We'll look into that later. We have to do some cannabis compliance alphabet soup. This is going to just explain some things to you because I'm going to be throwing a lot of acronyms at you and I don't want you to be confused. So we're going to talk about good agricultural and collection practices, which is GACP, and that is from the WHO, which was established in 2003, and then the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, established one in 2006. And there have additionally been country-specific versions. So Thailand has their own Thai GACP, Colombia has their own Colombian GACP, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the other countries have said, look, if we're going to do domestic cultivation, we want to somewhat align to this international standard and adopt that as a requirement for the producers in this country. Next, we have GMP, which is good manufacturing practice. This is moving more into the processed product side. So we have two major GMPs, the European Union, EU GMP, and the TGA GMP, which you're all familiar with. There is also an ASEAN GMP, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and then we also have SAPRA GMP, which is a South African Health Products Regulatory Authority GMP as well. There's a bunch of them as well. Colombia has their own, Uruguay has their own, there's a ton of them that are all over the world, but these are kind of the two core standards that you will hear mentioned very commonly in the cannabis space. GACP and GMP applicability is off of this table from the PICS guide, and this is essentially where they kind of fit in. So on the cultivation and collection and harvesting of plants, which is cannabis included, that's all GACP. Very clear, that's where that standard comes into play. On the cutting and drying of plants, algae, fungi, etc., we have across the board a mix of requirements from the GACP to the GMP side, and then anything related to extraction and distillation, anything of heavy processing, like anything where you're amplifying or concentrating the plant, that's all GMP. So all of that is pharmaceutical manufacturing. For any country where they view cannabis as a pharmaceutical and they want to fall into this framework, this is the general division table they use. I'm going to touch a bit on the global cannabis landscape because we've actually brought up, I'm so surprised and happy that Canada was brought up so many times as a Canadian. But we'll talk about a couple of the big players in the space right now and what they're doing so you can sort of see what's happening on the global scale. So for Canada, we have both medical and recreational. The access is very easy. I can go home, actually before I land in Canada, the day or two before, I call my grandma up and say there's going to be a lot of cannabis come to the house, like make sure you let the guy in. And I order like a ton of edibles and a ton of flour and I stock up, and so the second I get home, my products are available. Any adult in Canada can buy whatever they want. We do have some limits. There is, 30 grams at a time is the amount of flour you can buy in one go. But that means you can go to the store every single day and just pick up 30 grams. So really, you have kind of unfettered access to the product. And the medical is very easy. You can go online and you can just talk to someone for 5 minutes and you can get a prescription, which is how many people are enacting medical in this day and age. Our regulatory framework is quite unique. We're actually one of the only countries in the world that has a cannabis-specific regulatory framework. We developed good production practices for cannabis. No other product in Canada falls under this framework. It is specifically made for cannabis. It takes in mind the full cultivation, post-harvest, extraction process, and it is governed by one single group, which is very, very fantastic. We are limited on imports. There's actually almost none. It can only be for medical or scientific reasons. So we have done that for various reasons. Number one, because we are recreational in Canada, and the whole thing with the UN and Trudeau not being super comfortable with it means that we can't bring product in. And the second thing for that is to protect our market. We are a very heavy production market. We don't need cannabis from anybody else flooding into our market and messing up pricing, which we'll talk about with Australia. We're very export heavy, one of the largest exporters in the world of cannabis products. We export both flower and extracts to various markets. The products that we have domestically available and for export are flowers, extracts, and edibles. And for GACP and GMP, we only have GACP compliance for export. So if you're selling within Canada, GPP is sufficient. If you want to export, GACP is required. We also have several GMP manufacturing facilities that do what we call a GMP wash. And this is to take GACP compliant flower, put it through a GMP process, and pump it out the other side, which allows us to access markets like Germany, the UK, and Australia. Thailand is my favorite market, also just because I love living there, and it's just generally a chaotic place to be. So Thailand has been like this really big trendsetter. Not that anyone will follow the trend, I don't think, but they really were like, whatever guys, do whatever you want. That will never happen again. So if you weren't there and you didn't get to see it, I'm sorry, but you missed it. In the history of the world, I don't foresee any other country just saying, do whatever you want, it's fine, and look, we'll figure it out after. And so they had both medical and recreational use, but they're now trying to scale back the recreational. And then Ben just asked me, he said, hey, is it still really hard to get? No, you can just walk around anywhere. There are still 9,000 shops open. They will get raided by the police, they'll bribe the police, and they'll open up the next day. And so this is kind of, generally speaking, Thailand's enforcement, due to the level of corruption, is not the best. And this is also a product that I don't feel that the police feel is actually very threatening to them or is a problem, so they're not really strict on it. What they're supposed to do if they see you smoking outside is like give you tickets. What they're supposed to do if they see a shop open is to shut it down. That's not really happening. But Thailand is really pushing for more of a medically focused market, and they're in the midst of making different changes to their legislation. They've changed it like 3 times this year to essentially enact some kind of control in their system. And the largest reason for that is the INCB went nuts and was like, you cannot export anything. Like, we're going to block this from happening because we have no way to control your supply chain. You don't know who's producing cannabis, where it's coming from, how much they're making. And so there's been a lot of adjustments strictly so that Thailand can become a huge export hub. They have Thai GACP that is required in Thailand for all of the cultivators who wish to export. It is enforced by the Department of Thai and Alternative Traditional Medicines. They do not allow imports as well, I think for the same reason as Canada. When you plan to be a production-heavy country, you do not want to allow imports into your country. And for export, they're predominantly exporting into Australia. There have been multiple articles this year about the cannabis being flooding in from Thailand to Australia. That will continue until there's any kind of regulatory change. And they've just opened up Germany. UK is still saying no, the Home Office is still saying no Thailand cannabis right now, but Germany's opened up. I myself have registered 6 companies in Germany from Thailand that I can directly move product into now. The products for Thailand are flower extracts are extremely limited. Extracts above 0.2% are actually illegal. There are only 5 or 6 license holders who have these very valuable extract licenses. So we will see, I'm working with 4 of them on getting GMPs, we will see a lot of extract moved to Thailand in the new year. But as of right now, they're a flower heavy producer. Compliance to Thai GACP, as I said, is required for export, and there is no GMP manufacturing happening in Thailand. And that means that all the flower from Thailand going into Germany has to go somewhere. It can come to Australia to be GMP washed, or it can go into Europe to be GMP washed. And this is also a very big pathway for Australia to position themselves commercially, to take a lot of that market share from the Thailand cannabis that wants to move into Germany and have it pushed through this supply chain. Germany, of course, is like one of the biggest players in the space. Everyone's super obsessed with Germany. So they're medical and recreational. The recreational, as I mentioned, is kind of an association or club model. Very easy access, although telemedicine is now being scaled back a little bit. The regulatory framework is that all medical flower must be GMP compliant, and they're very import heavy. They actually just increased their limits for the INCB to 192.5 tons this year because they hit their quota by September, October. The previous quota, I think, was around 140, maybe 150. Very little domestic production in Germany. Several reasons for this. One of the biggest ones is that when Germany first legislated, they said that you'd have to do cultivation essentially in a vault. It had to be 1 foot thick concrete. There needed to be blast-proof windows. There needed to be tank-resistant controls. So actually, someone I did know who was producing there bought a NATO bunker from 1987 and converted it into a cannabis grow. It was the easiest building for him to buy to actually meet the insane security requirements. And so, as a result of that and their own misstep, they have now been outpaced by every other country for production, and they have now just ended up being the biggest buyer of cannabis. They purchase flowers and extracts into Germany. Extracts are still very small. It's growing slowly but surely. But regulators there I've worked with, we're trying to get some hash moved in from really big problem for them. And just more so to figure out where it fits, because it's a dry extract, and understanding what happens at the pharmacy level. So they have compounding there, essentially, you would have similar to what you have here. But unlike the option here where there's some compounding pharmacies and there's some that kind of straight sell products, German law requires that the pharmacies do something. So they're supposed to receive cannabis in bulk, and they're supposed to then pack it down into smaller units. So they've had some kind of quality check on it. They're supposed to test it on receipt, and then they give it to the patient. So doing this with flower is a lot easier than extracts. Extracts are very difficult to handle. A lot of these pharmacies, none of the pharmacies are cannabis specific. So unlike pharmacies here that are very heavy on cannabis or cannabis clinics, they don't have that, and they're not allowed to have that. Which means that if I ran a cannabis pharmacy, I would open a little gummies manufacturing line in the back, I'd have an oil packing line, but I'm a regular pharmacist and I sell like 7,000 other products and I don't really care that much. So because of the way the law is written right now, and because of the fact that commercially we cannot own pharmacies, we're not allowed to, our groups can't own pharmacies, we're really limited on the amount of influence we have on the products that they take. So that law is actually very funny, the way that it's been spaced out. The pharmacists are actually one of the core reasons why we can't move in different types of cannabis products. For Germany, they have compliance to EMA GACP, so when you ship products to Germany, you should have it cultivated under this GACP requirement. And then for finished products, it should be EU GMP or equivalent, which would involve TGA GMP. Australia has a medical market, and it is relatively easy to access. I had someone offer to get me a prescription like this, which I will probably be doing in the next week or so. Medical flower must be TGA GMP compliant, but it was brought up previously, there's a huge disparity. So you have so much control and restriction on what's produced here, but you will take random product from Thailand that no one's even checked or audited and then shove it into the country, into the medical market. So there's a really big disparity of what is domestically produced and the hoops these domestic producers jump through versus what's coming in from the import. You are a very import heavy country. 88 tons, I believe, has been imported, or that's the new INCB limit for what you have. So you're getting almost half of what Germany's importing, which is great, but it means that there's a lot of cannabis flowing through from other countries and not as much being produced here. Export is increasing. We're seeing a lot of export to Germany and the UK. It's actually shocking that Australia was so slow to export as somebody who's supposed to have essentially a mutual recognition agreement with GMP. The fact that Australia is not a bigger export is one of the problems I think the Australian landscape. For products, we have flowers, extracts, and edibles, and then the funny thing is that you have no requirement for GACP compliance. You actually have no cultivation regulations related to production practices really at all, which is extremely risky to patients here. And for finished product, it is TGA GMP, and again, that has a mutual recognition agreement with EU GMP. Australia severely lags behind other key players in the cannabis space on multiple fronts. We'll go through these. But licensing, security, unclear guidance, microbial limits, patient autonomy and access, GACP compliance, and lastly, GMP compliance. Australia has one of the slowest licensing processes in the cannabis industry. Canada is about 6 to 12 months. Thailand's like 1 to 2 months. And you can pay for it to be faster if you want. Germany is 6 to 12 months, and Australia is about 12 to 24. Licensing is very complex. There's multiple authorities involved, and there are a lot of permits required for cultivation. So in Canada, you may get a blanket license that says you can cultivate whatever you want, and in Australia, you're applying for a permit every single year. So there's a lot of regulatory burden on being able to actually produce in this country. Australia requires narcotics level security for their facilities. This is very outdated, and it increases the cost and infrastructure for complexity. So Germany, like I said, when they first did cultivation, they were even more stringent than Australia was. It was a complete misstep in the wrong direction, and it then got outpaced by every other country that could produce cannabis and have completely destroyed their own domestic market production. Australia's are not as bad, but they are still quite outdated. Many other countries have lower security requirements. So Canada also had stricter requirements. In 2019, they pulled them back. It's now much easier to have a facility. Security requirements again changed, I think, in 2021, where we had micro cultivators or small cultivation facilities with much less security requirements. Thailand is, I don't think there's any right now. I mean, maybe like don't leave your front door open and invite people in. So security requirements in other jurisdictions are much more proportional to the risk. An actual cannabis plant is like super low risk for someone to come and steal one. They would have to then cut it down, dry it, cure it, etc. For sure, finished cannabis, okay, we're seeing some risk there, but it's not a super high value product anymore. It's not that expensive any longer in most countries. And so security is, generally speaking, if you have copper wire in your building, it's like having cannabis. You should have some level of security for your own safety, of course, but the biggest thing, of course, is how Australia views diversion and the reporting around diversion and the requirements around that. So I just went through a TGA audit and an ODC audit back to back, and I have a lot of notes for them if anybody knows anybody there who wants to talk to me. Unclear guidance. So the multiple departments that are handling this, we've got the ODC for narcotics licensing, we have the TGA for the GMP and manufacturing, and then we have state health departments for storage and movements. Many producers have licenses across all three, and they don't really speak to each other. So the guidance is unclear, it's incomplete in some areas, it's inconsistent in others, and there's a high degree of interpretation. The two things that come to mind to me are two events that happened to me this year. Labeling of your cannabis product is extremely inconsistent because there actually is not a labeling guideline put out by our government. Every other government is like, here is how the products have to be labeled. There is no clear communication on how that should be done. So I look at cannabis labels in Australia and they're all significantly different. They have different amounts of information. One interesting thing is that they will tell you, the TGA will tell you that you have to include statements from poison control, right? So it's like, keep out of reach of children, etc. But the front of the poison control guide, it says, does not apply to special access scheme medicines. So then you have people that have just been picking and choosing what statements they want, and then you have the TGA deciding to crack down on you because they just don't like how you did it. This is just really complex for people who are producers to actually find out, when am I going to get my hand slapped, and when is it okay? And there's other people who just say, I'm just going to take the risk and do what I want, and then they are able to have these like much more creative labels and have better advertising and things along those lines. The other one would be adverse events. I tried to look at adverse event reporting to write procedure around it, and I did 45 minutes of being circled back in the loop. You go to the TGA website, it's like, if you have to report an adverse event, you have to go to the special access scheme. So I go into there, and then I keep going to page after page after page, and it moves me all the way back around to kind of the first page where again it said to go through the special pathway. So there was no special pathway. And the form that I did find from the TGA would have been written in the 90s, and it didn't really have any information on it that would be important to capture for an adverse event. As someone who's reported them in Europe, I know what that looks like, and there's a lot of lag here on what's available. So you're making cannabis producers navigate a really broken set of rules and guidelines, and then just hoping they come out the other side, and when they don't, you smack them on the hand. And that's kind of the attitude that a lot of cannabis producers have in dealing with the regulators and authorities here, is that they're not on their side, and they feel really confused, and they don't know what to do. Australia has some of the strictest microbial limits in the world. So Australia does not follow herbal medicines monographs like Germany. I compare Germany and Australia a lot because they are two GMP heavy countries, and so you would therefore assume they're somewhat similar. TGO 93, which is used for cannabis, is not cannabis specific. It actually doesn't match any of the herbal monographs from the European Pharmacopoeia of what you should do. And that is why Australia's limits are 10 times lower. This means that all of your product is irradiated. All cannabis in Australia goes through irradiation. Stereotech must be just rolling in cash at this point. It costs 17 cents a gram to irradiate cannabis, and everything has to pass through it. This is a higher cost for producers. It's a barrier to export your product as well. Germany will not take irradiated cannabis. So if you are a producer and you made a batch of cannabis and you irradiate it, you can no longer send it to the biggest market in the world that brings the product in. So you have to know very early how you want to fate your product. And with irradiation being required here, there are very little alternative remediation options, such as cryopasteurization, cold plasma, electromagnetic radiofrequency, because many of them cannot reduce the microbial load sufficiently to pass for Australian requirements. So then you're a producer in Australia, you make some cannabis, you're hoping it's okay microbially, you send it to Germany, and it increases by 1 log, and you have product trapped in Germany and have to pay a lot of money to bring it back. Patients require specific products on their prescription, or I should say are forced to have specific products. So if I say I want from company A, product A, and that's what you prescribe me, and I go to the pharmacy to pick it up and they don't have it, I have to come back to the doctor again and I have to get another product prescribed. Companies A branded flower and companies B branded flower are not significantly different enough that they should be considered different products in the way that it's prescribed. In Canada, it just says high THC cannabis. Germany actually followed this as well, and they have also changed it as of April this year to allow people to just kind of pick up whatever they need. If I'm a doctor and I've decided you can have high THC cannabis, I don't need to tell you what product you have to buy. I don't need to tell you from this company you can only buy product A, B, and C, and you can't buy anything else. And if you want something else, please take more time out of your busy workday to come back and ask me for something else. And so this is a huge barrier to access, in my opinion, and something that really needs to align more with the global stage. I love this term, legalized with prejudice. That's how I consider most cannabis markets, to be honest. It's still heavily treated as a controlled narcotic. There's very high pricing, and we're hearing a lot of too many prescriptions. I saw an article earlier this year. I think it was one clinical group, did over 6,000 prescriptions, something like that. Everyone was freaking out. but it's this whole thing where if you said it's okay, and you've said that people can get the cannabis by following pathway A, then they should be allowed to get it. If it's 8 million people, then it's 8 million people. It feels like a lot of people, and not just Australia, many countries have legalized cannabis, but they have a lot of prejudice around it and the use of the product, and it's very apparent in the way they let patients access their medicine. Australia doesn't have a domestic GACP program, and there's no equivalent, so there is no cultivation guidelines. A producer here can track very little information, they can capture very little data, and so that basically means that you have more consistency between Australia and farms. They really can be at the complete opposite of one another from a quality perspective. There's also higher risk of cultivation-related quality issues with respect to traceability, testing, and cleanliness of the product, because you haven't put anything out that says you must legally follow this and we're going to check that you do. Adopting, for example, even the World Health Organization, GACP, and forcing cultivators to adhere to this would not only help for more consistent product, would also actually help with their ability to then export. On the GMP compliance side, Australia did something very interesting. There was this line that I showed you on the table where GACP and GMP overlap, and this is in the cutting and drying of plants. So in Germany, they made a clarification in 2022, I think, and they said, look, GACP is going to be cultivation and harvest, and then drying onwards is going to be GMP. And Australia actually had this exact same interpretation. I was building a facility out consulting 5 years ago at this point, and then all of a sudden, they said, no, we're going to switch it. So Australia had said, look, we're going to make sure that we have drying part of GMP, even though Germany had not yet clarified this, right? It was everyone's kind of making a best guess. So they were kind of leaning in that direction. And then all of a sudden they changed their laws to say, no, interpretation-wise, we're going to move it like this. And so this, unfortunately, has now created a misalignment on the global stage, which means that products that are dried here under GACP do not count as GMP products. And there is an MRA between Germany and Australia, but we're seeing Germany push back on that and saying, we won't take your cannabis anymore because you don't dry under GMP, and so it doesn't count any longer. The impacts of all of these various items are slow domestic industry growth. You have very long licensing timelines and it's very expensive, and that means that you're not going to have as much domestic production, and that's why you're importing so much flour. Very poor global competitiveness with respect to export because of the fact that your GMP does not align with others' GMP, and the fact that you don't have GACP baked into your regulations, which leads to lower access to investment as well, because people don't see Australia as a very heavy export country, and so therefore they feel like it's very insulated on its own. And if you're not playing on the global scale, people don't want to really get involved. There's higher patient costs, as I mentioned, for the irradiation. There's also just the access to the medicine, going back and forth to the doctor over and over again. And lower quality products, because we're also importing products that don't have any kind of compliance at all whatsoever. And the domestic production is so low, you're essentially getting flooded with a ton of low quality products being pushed into the market, which is damaging the market and just plummeting the price points. You're also very slow to innovate. I think that's generally, from what I've heard these conversations, an Australian thing. You're a little bit slow to kind of, get the next foot forward in front of the other, and that is hurting you. The industry moves extremely quickly. It's one of the industries where being very slow and not innovating can have a very large and lasting impact. Some of my solutions that I'd like to propose would be reductions in licensing costs and complexity. It would be really helpful if one authority just took ownership of this product, put out some new guidelines and said this is how it's going to be. Updated security guidelines with reflecting product risk, so decreasing the barriers for producers to produce the product. Development of clear cannabis-specific guidance. Many countries don't do this, which is a huge problem. Cannabis is unique. It is not like any other product you have in medicines or in natural health products or traditional medicines. It needs its own infrastructure and framework. Better global alignment on testing standards, so Australians don't have to always be consuming cannabis that's been irradiated, and also allow for better export. Increased patient autonomy, and participation in the development of an international compliance standard. So that's kind of what I'm here to talk about today, and why I kind of did these events with Sean, and why we're doing what we're doing. A unified framework that brings together governments, businesses, and consumers will allow for standardized products around the world. You will have easier international trade by harmonizing compliance requirements. You will have more investment through predictable regulations and quality assurance, and you will have a compliance framework that allows for you to move your products between jurisdictions much more easily. So as I said, I'm the founder and executive director of the International Cannabis Quality Standards Association, and that's what we do. We ask industry stakeholders to come together. We develop working groups. We act as a group that governments can come to for advisement or advice. We help groups that are lobbying their own government by feeding them data, information, and case examples and other bits of regulations from other countries, saying what's been done correctly, what's been done incorrectly. And really the whole hope of our organization is just to bring people together, unify the industry, and create a better platform for all of us to participate on a global scale. you very much for your
Has anybody got any questions for Atiyyah before we go for lunch?
No, it was very good.
Very comprehensive, yeah.
So I was like rushing through that. I'm so sorry. We were a little shorter on time, but yes, if anyone has any questions, you can come.
Could we hear what you're saying? We've got to take that on board and really move forward.
So you're based in Australia?
Brisbane
full-time,
now,
right?
yes. Yeah, I did go to Brisbane.
Right.
Yes.
I'll second that. Can we have the slides?
Pardon me?
Can we have
Slides?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I can email them out.
Well, that's great. If nobody else has got any more questions, it's a rainy lunchtime. We're not supplying lunch, sorry, so there's endless cafes all over Sydney Uni where you can stand in the rain. And we'll be back